On a dreary autumn evening, the night wrapped the small town of Eldridge in a thick blanket of fog, eerie and suffocating. It felt like nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The road leading out of town twisted like the skeletal fingers of some long-forgotten monster. It was a macabre pathway, carving through the dense woods that surrounded Eldridge, as if trying to escape the very town they protected. The trees loomed above, their branches bare and skeletal, the remnants of summer long gone. The moon hung low in the sky, cloaked by clouds that seemed to loom ominously, threatening to swallow any light it had to offer. The streetlights flickered intermittently, casting unsettling shadows that danced menacingly along the pavement. The soft yellow glow barely penetrated the fog, making the world beyond the light feel darker and more intimidating. It was an unsettling sight, one that trickled a shiver down anyone's spine who dared to venture outside. In the fading daylight, Peter, a teenager filled with curiosity and a thirst for adventure, decided to take a late-night drive. He had heard many ghost stories from his friends, juicy tales that twisted his imagination. One story, in particular, stuck with him, the ghostly hitchhiker who appeared to warn travelers of doom on that very road. She was said to stand silently, her pale form cloaked in mist, waiting for someone who might need a warning. The thought amazed him. Despite warnings from his friends and the chill in the air, Peter's curiosity outweighed his apprehension. He hopped into his old, beat-up car, which he affectionately named Rusty. The car's engine rattled like a caged creature, protesting against its drive. It was his trusty vehicle, yet, at that moment, it felt like the car knew the tales that surrounded the road and was perhaps just as apprehensive as he was. Shifting into drive, Peter felt a rush of excitement. The gravel crunched beneath his tires as he ventured onto the forsaken road, feeling cocky and unafraid, a brave explorer setting out on a quest. As he drove deeper into the woods, each turn brought him face to face with towering trees that leaned closer, their gnarled branches stretching out like grotesque arms trying to grab at him. The noise of the engine filled the silence around him, yet the whispers of the wind seemed to caress the car's sides softly, as if warning him to turn back. A shiver ran down his spine as the chill seeped into his bones. Memories of the frightening tales climbed to the surface of his mind, where drivers mentioned the eerie figure who appeared on the roadside, often cloaked in mist, imploring them to stop. A warning of a treacherous curve ahead that had claimed many lives. Peter felt both excited and frightened but had to admit that it felt surreal, almost like a bad dream. It all felt like a silly story until, suddenly, he caught his first glimpse of the apparition. Just beyond a sharp bend in the road, a figure materialized, silhouetted against the swirl of fog. She was frighteningly pale, clad in what looked like a tattered white dress. The sheer fabric fluttered gently in the breeze, giving her an almost ghostly appearance as she stood motionless. Her hair cascaded around her face like a waterfall of shadows, adding a mystical yet eerie air to her presence. Peter's heart pounded fiercely, the rhythm thrumming in his ears as he wrestled with the irrational urge to speed past or pull over. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, feeling both fear and a strange sense of determination surge within him. What should he do? With trepidation twisting in his stomach, he slowed down. Memories of the cautionary tales bubbled to the surface of his mind, mixing with the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As he came closer, he could see the girl's face more clearly. Her hollow eyes, dark and haunted, stared back at him, filled with despair that sent a chill coursing through his veins. It was as if she held the weight of all the lost souls who had wandered this road before him. Bewilderment struck him. She was calling, her mouth shaping words that he could not hear, perhaps murmuring an unholy warning of the danger that lay ahead. But what was it? Despite his better judgment, he pulled to a stop, the car's engine sputtering into silence. The stillness was almost suffocating, and Peter felt the world around him fade into that moment. Time seemed frozen and the only sound was his heart thumping like a drum in his chest. As he rolled down the window, a strange chill filled the air, heavy with an unsettling stillness. The girl stepped forward into the glow of his dim headlights, her frail form glimmering like a ghostly beacon against the oppressing darkness. "You must turn back." Her voice was soft yet firm, almost blasphemous, yet it hung heavily in the air with authority. "The curve ahead, it's a trap, a cursed place where many have lost their way." Peter's heart raced even quicker, now sounding like a hammer against metal. Instincts screamed at him to drive away, to escape the strange girl and the road. But something deep inside him urged him to stay, to listen. His curiosity clawed at him, making the situation all the more confusing. "What do you mean?" he stammered, the rational part of his mind suppressing the chill of fear creeping up his spine. As he searched her face for clues or answers, she pointed a skeletal finger down the road. Her eyes implored him, filled with such despair that it felt like it could seep into his very soul. "You have to listen. Turn back now, or you won't make it out," she wailed. Her voice echoed with a guttural quality that seemed to shake the very air around him. It resonated deep within him, filling him with terror. Suddenly, the wind howled, rattling the trees, as if the very earth protested against something foul lurking nearby. Peter felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up straight, his breath hitching in his throat. It felt as if the world around him was alive, warning him of some grave danger, something he couldn't quite grasp yet. In that moment, reality twisted into a grotesque nightmare. The girl raised her hands, an odd gesture that seemed to warn him, but before he could understand her message, she began to fade into the fog. She melted away, as quickly as she had appeared, leaving mere whispers among the rustling leaves. A cold sweat dripped down Peter's back. Had it all been a hallucination? Could ghosts truly roam these desolate roads? His heart hammered as he recalled the stories once more, and an unsettling realization settled over him like a dark veil. He had to heed her warning. He had to leave before the darkness consumed him. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, he quickly shifted his car into gear again and turned the ignition. His body felt tense, eyes darting to the road ahead when a deafening screech suddenly cut through the air. Panic clawed at him as he spotted enormous shadows lunging out from the trees. They were the twisted silhouettes of car wrecks, scattered remnants strung along the road like tombstones marking the graves of lost souls. Peter's courage faltered as he gazed upon the jagged remnants of old vehicles, each serving as a testament to the nightmares that had unfolded here over the years. Would he become just another name whispered around the campfires of Eldridge, another tale of caution shared among friends? The thought sent a wave of nausea rolling through him, his mind racing with possibilities. With a shaky breath, he gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing himself to look ahead. Without a second thought, he stepped on the gas, speeding away from the terrifying sight, glancing in the rearview mirror for any remnants of the ghostly warning he had just witnessed. The air felt thick with deception, the sinister ground beneath him threatening to swallow him whole. He could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him, a suffocating blanket of dread that made him want to scream. Yet, the only sound that escaped his lips was a whispered promise to himself. He would never return to this cursed road, not ever again. As he drove faster, the fog seemed to part slightly, granting him a brief glimpse of familiar landmarks, each welcome sight reminding him of safety, of home. But deep down, he knew a part of him had changed. The tales he once dismissed early now lingered in his thoughts. As the trees began to thin out and the town of Eldridge came into view, he couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, as if the shadows of the woods still watched him, ready to reclaim a lost soul. And with that thought nestled in his chest, he promised himself that whatever awaited him back in town, it was always better than facing the dark road again. Always better than the whispers and ghostly figures that haunted the tales of Eldridge. He wouldn't just carry the weight of that night, he would carry the secrets of the lost souls, forever etched in his memory like the moon obscured by clouds, a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the safety of the light. The tale of his chilling encounter blended with the fog that enveloped Eldridge night after night, haunting Peter in his restless dreams. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself back on that dark road, feeling the chill from the ghostly girl who had appeared to him. Shadows lurked in every corner of his room, whispering secrets of the night. It felt like she was watching him, her sad eyes following him wherever he went. The thought of the ghostly girl, her expression filled with sorrow and warning, haunted him to his core. As the days passed, Peter noticed strange occurrences surrounding him. It wasn't just him feeling uneasy. His friends began to speak of unexplainable happenings, like pieces of some creepy puzzle fitting together. One sunny afternoon, Jake mentioned how his dog, a big golden retriever named Max, suddenly howled every night without warning. It was strange because Max had always been calm and relaxed. Jake said he had never heard Max make such a noise before, and it frightened him. Meanwhile, Mia had her own eerie story to tell. She lived near a lovely old lady named Mrs. Baker, who often sat on her porch with a cup of tea, enjoying the day. But recently, Mrs. Baker had become convinced that she was seeing strange figures emerge from the trees at dusk. She described them as shadowy outlines that moved but never seemed to step into the light. The townspeople began to talk about these sightings, and it added to the feeling of dread hanging over Eldridge. There was also the incident of a couple who had lost control of their car on the same road where Peter had his encounter. Luckily, they escaped without severe injury, but they were terrified. They spoke of feeling a sudden urge to swerve, although they couldn't explain why. The road seemed to have a mind of its own. The whispers of these events spread like wildfire through the town, making everyone more anxious. Determined not to let fear govern him, Peter thought it best to meet with Jake and Mia at their favorite diner, a cozy little place they loved. The clinking of cutlery and the smell of burgers filled the air, but no one felt relaxed. An unsettling tension loomed over their table like a cloud ready to burst. "You guys won't believe what I saw on that road," Peter exclaimed, his voice cracking with anxious energy. He felt compelled to share his chilling vision, the ghost girl who had appeared to him, warning him of danger, and the whole experience he couldn't shake from his mind. Jake smirked, dismissive of Peter's experience. "Come on, man, it's just a story to scare little kids. Everyone knows," but his voice faltered at the intense look in Peter's eyes. Peter's heart raced. He felt like a balloon ready to burst, full of fear and urgency. "But what if it's true?" Mia interrupted, leaning closer, her expression surprisingly serious. "What if someone did die there? Stories like that usually have some basis in reality." The conversation shifted, tension sparking between them as the diner's fluorescent lights blinked ominously, a repetitive reminder of how unpredictable life could be. Their chatter devolved into laughter, an uneasy attempt to wash away the feeling of fear that surrounded them. Just as Peter began to feel a sense of normalcy returning, the old television in the corner flickered to life. The news anchor's voice sliced through the laughter, sending a chill down their spines. He announced a horrifying story about a recent accident on Eldridge's cursed road. "A car veered off the path in the same spot as previous accidents," the anchor said, his face serious and grim. Witnesses reported seeing an eerie light and a figure standing on the roadside shortly before the incident. A blood-curdling silence fell over the diner, swallowing laughter whole. Everyone was frozen, salt shakers forgotten, forks suspended in midair. Mia's voice trembled as she whispered, "Do you think it was the ghost?" A heavy atmosphere surrounded them, weaving fear into their fabrics, tightening like a Schrodinger's box, holding secrets of both reality and fantasy. Jake shook his head, trying to dismiss the dread growing inside him. But deep down, Peter couldn't shake it. He felt the chilling sensation that the pieces of some unseen puzzle were falling into place, entwining their lives with the restless spirits that refused to leave the forsaken road. Days turned into weeks, yet the haunting image of the girl lingered in Peter's mind, gnawing at him like a persistent itch. He drove past the same road numerous times, but his heart raced every time, refusing to glance in the direction of the cursed curve. The town seemed to grow quieter, as though it was holding its breath, more suffocating under an ominous gray sky that hung above like a heavy blanket. People everywhere whispered of unseen horrors in hushed tones, stories of longing and despair. "It's not just a ghost," one elder warned him, gripping Peter's shoulders with a trembling hand. "She's a harbinger of deeper darkness that wants to find its way back." Compelled by the unfolding mystery and the eerie warnings that surrounded them, Peter decided it was time for a deeper exploration. So, he returned to the outskirts of Eldridge with Jake and Mia on a moonless night, when the stars were hidden beneath a thick fog. The lack of light did little to comfort them. The shadows appeared to be alive, morphing into grotesque shapes. It felt like they were entering a different world, one where danger lurked just around the corner. "This is insane," Jake muttered, glancing back nervously as they parked the car. "What are we looking for?" "I have to know if she's real," Peter replied, determination lacing his words. "She warned me, and there must be more to her story." Fear twisted in Mia's stomach as she hesitated, doubt creeping into her heart. "What if something even worse happens? We shouldn't be here." But Peter's resolve was palpable. It lit a fire in her heart even as her instincts screamed for her to flee. "What if this ghost girl is trying to tell us something? We can't just ignore her," Peter insisted. As they approached the cunning curve, The world around them deepened into silence, becoming eerily quiet. The air grew thick, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for their next move. Questions swirled through their minds as they parked the car, their heavy hearts struggling against the grip of fear. They stepped out, the dark road swallowing their nervous breaths like a hungry beast. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown, and the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes sounded thunderous in the stillness. Suddenly, the shadows ahead began to shift, and a faint figure emerged from the trees. It was her, the ghostly hitchhiker, more haunting than he remembered, her presence pulsating with an unsettling energy. "You should have listened," she whispered, her voice reverberating eerily in the stillness. The words wrapped around Peter's heart like cold fingers, squeezing tightly. Panic surged through him, as she extended her skeletal hand toward him, her hollow eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and malice. "You came too close, and now it's too late." Before Peter could respond, a bolt of terror surged through his veins like ice. He whipped his head around just as Jake screamed. The headlights of the car illuminated a twisted mass of limbs in the shadows, a disfigured and unholy creature crawling out of the forest, ravenous and eager. Its skin shimmered in the light, a sickly gray where smudges of darkness danced across its surface, almost as if it was wearing a cloak of despair. Jagged teeth glistened in the pale light, sharp and wicked, a grotesque reminder that not all shadows die in the moon's glow. Mia screamed, her voice piercing the eerie calm as the figure lunged from the shadows. Time seemed to freeze for a heartbeat, before the world around them exploded into chaos. The air was thick with the scent of fear, and adrenaline coursed through Peter's veins like fire, igniting a fierce need to survive. The fragile boundary between the known and the unknown shattered, plunging them into a nightmare they had unwittingly provoked. "Run!" Peter shouted, his voice echoing down the dark road. But where could they run? The creature was blocking their only escape, sleek and fast, moving like predatory smoke, its hungry eyes glinting in the dim light. Heart pounding, he turned to face the ghostly girl again, who remained eerily still as if waiting for something. "Why are you doing this?" he yelled, feeling more desperate with each second. Suddenly, the ghost began to shimmer, her form flickering like a candle in a draft. "You must heed the warnings, or you will join me in despair," she breathed, her voice intertwining with the wind, growing softer. With a piercing cry, the creature lunged again, its growl rumbling through the air like thunder. Without thinking, Peter grabbed Mia's arm, and they started to back away slowly, trying to create distance. Jake ran toward the car, heart racing. "Get in!" he yelled, his panic making him frantic. They glanced back to see the ghost girl still in place, now appearing almost ethereal rather than threatening. Her eyes showed a glimmer of compassion through layers of sadness. "Find the truth," she called, her voice melding with the darkness. "Tell others what happened here." Peter's heart raced as he held tightly onto Mia's hand. As she cried out, he noticed the creature faltering for a moment, as if it was confused by their mixed emotions. But there was no time to contemplate. They sprinted toward the car, feeling something sinister unravel behind them. Once inside, they locked the doors and Jake quickly started the engine. "What was that thing?" Mia breathed heavily, her eyes wide in shock. "And why did the ghost girl help us? We need to get out of here," Peter shouted, voice hoarse and trembling. The creature growled, prowling closer as Jake hurriedly pulled away from the cursed road, the headlights sweeping away the shadows in front of them. More and more of the darkness dissipated as they gained speed, but the echoes of that chilling encounter clawed at their minds, seeping into their memories. Once they reached the safety of the familiar streets of Eldridge, they slowed down, their breaths sinking with the rhythm of their racing hearts. "We were so close to danger," Mia said quietly, eyes glued to the windows as if the unsettling encounters could follow them home. "What do you think the ghost girl meant?" Peter thought for a moment, his heart still pounding. "I think she tried to protect us. Maybe we need to find out more about that road, about those accidents. There has to be something that keeps happening there, something we can uncover." Jake nodded slowly, realizing the depth of what transpired. "Yeah, let's get to the bottom of this. We can't just ignore it. Maybe if we learn what happened, we can warn people." The tension settled, but the thrill of adventure coursed through them. They may have escaped this time, but they promised to dig deeper, to chase the mystery forward, driven by a yearning to shed light in places where darkness lingered. The ghostly girl's warning echoed in Peter's mind, a reminder that some stories aren't just stories, they're cries for help, and he wouldn't turn away. With each mile away from that cursed road, they felt a strange mix of relief, fear, and determination. They were bound to this mystery now, a thread pulled, drawing them closer to truths hidden in shadows. They would uncover the story of the girl and the darkness somehow entangled with Eldridge, for there was no turning back now. The darkness that enveloped Eldridge swallowed Peter, Mia, and Jake as they stumbled backward, hearts racing, the night pressing in around them like a heavy blanket. The hitchhiker's warning echoed in Peter's mind, insisting they turn back, but panic clawed at each of their thoughts. The grotesque creature lunged again, its long, gnarled limbs reaching out toward them, the pale moonlight barely illuminating its fearsome features. Its eyes were like deep, empty voids, devoid of humanity and filled only with hunger. With each step it took, the ground quaked beneath them, and the trees rustled in fear, as if trying to shield themselves from the monster moving through their branches. The creature's guttural growls danced eerily through the air, hauntingly reminiscent of lost souls yearning for freedom, intertwining with their own panicked breaths. With fear escalating, Peter's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Mia's arm, feeling her trembling beneath his grip. "Run!" he shouted, desperation pouring from his voice. They stumbled backward toward the car, their breaths coming out in quick gasps, but the world around them seemed to warp and twist, as if the forest had come alive and was resisting their escape. It was as if the gnarled branches were reaching out with malicious intent, trying to snatch them back into the dark, tangled labyrinth of trees that surrounded them. The thick fog slithered around them like a putrid shroud, overpowering their senses. It stifled their screams and concealed the terrible thing that hunted them as they dashed blindly through the treacherous terrain. The trees seemed to loom larger and more twisted, like monsters guarding their territory. Behind them, the creature rasped. Its breath was a harsh, demonical growl that reverberated through the unnaturally silent woods. Jake glanced back, and as he did, terror morphed into despair. The ghostly form of the hitchhiker flickered between the shadows and the creature, her hollow eyes piercing into Jake's soul. "It's a trap, run faster," Peter urged. Adrenaline surged through his veins, guiding his every step as they tore through the woods, weaving between ancient trees and jagged rocks that seemed to rise from the earth like teeth ready to bite. Mia stumbled, her panic palpable as the ground seemed unsteady beneath her feet. Peter grasped her hand tightly, his determination fortifying them both, and pulled her up, urging her to keep moving despite the fear clawing at her heart. The night felt alive with menace, darkness twisting and curling around them, trying to pull them into its malignant embrace. "Don't look back," he shouted, his voice echoing through the eerily still night. The dread of what lurked behind them was strong enough to spur them both onward. They pressed ahead, fear morphing into a burning will to survive. Each step echoed like thunder, each footfall seeming to shake the very forest as if warning the monsters to back away. The cacophony of unsettling sounds erupted from the trees, whispers, rustling leaves, and the snarls of the creature chasing them, creating a nightmarish symphony of horror that rang in their ears. The hitchhiker reappeared suddenly, stepping into their path like a ghostly vision momentarily blocking them. Her form was radiant, yet shadowy, a grotesque juxtaposition of grace and terror. "He's hungry," she warned, her voice scarcely audible under the chaos and fear that surrounded them, "and you've disturbed the rest. You need to leave." Mia's heart pounded in her chest as they finally spotted the car in the distance, glimmering faintly like a beacon of hope. But it was too late. Jake stumbled, his feet ensnared in the rotting roots that seemed to emerge from the ground. They twisted around him like sinister hands, intent on dragging him down into the depths of the dark forest. Peter reached for him, panic skyrocketing in his chest. "Jake!" he yelled, but Jake screamed, his voice high and full of terror. "Go, don't stop." Panic reigned in Peter's chest as despair clawed at him. He hesitated, torn between helping Jake and saving himself and Mia from the terror that loomed behind. The grotesque creature surged forth, a dark avalanche, swallowing the space around them, its glowing eyes gleaming with malicious hunger. "No!" Peter screamed, horror immobilizing him for a moment as he watched the terrible scene unfold. He felt as if the forest itself had come alive to mock them, the ground trembling with the angry rage of the beast. The creature advanced, its form twisted and deformed, and the hitchhiker stepped forward, her face etched with sorrow and urgency. "Turn away now," she cried, but Peter faltered, entranced by the horrific struggle before him. The ground churned violently as the creature claimed Jake, dragging him down with a combination of immense hunger and unimaginable rage. Peter's heart shattered, witnessing the horror unfold right before his eyes, as Jake's very essence seemed to dissolve into the forest's malignant depths. It was as if the woods were drinking him in, ready to feast upon the frightful snack they had unwittingly offered. "Mia, get in," Peter shouted, his voice laced with urgency and grief, tears staining his cheeks as he turned away from the horrific sight that was unfolding behind him. He pulled open the car door, his mind racing, urging Mia with sheer desperation to follow him. The cries of despair echoed in the air, wrapping around them like a noose, choking them with dread as they jumped into the vehicle. With shaking hands, Peter turned the ignition. The engine sputtered to life, its voice trembling like his own. As if summoned from the cursed depths below, the horrifying creature lunged at the car, its form dark and grotesque, a shadowy mass threatening to swallow them whole. "No!" he screamed, revving the engine with furious determination. The headlights blazed through the dark, illuminating the twisted scene they were leaving behind, Jake still ensnared, pleading with eyes that seemed to reach out to them in a desperate call for help. "Mia, we can't leave him," she cried out, trembling as she clutched the seat, her eyes wide with horror. Peter's gut twisted with pain, his heart aching for their lost friend. He felt the suffocating weight of despair trying to drag him into the depths of hopelessness. They had come to the woods as friends, and now one of them was lost in darkness. But Peter gulped down his dread, reminding himself of the danger. The creature's eyes gleamed with an insatiable hunger, a ravenous shine that threatened to consume them both if they hesitated. The reality of their situation crashed down upon them. Escape was the only lifeline they had left to cling to. He slammed the gas pedal down, and the tires squealed in protest as the car shot forward, tearing away from the nightmare behind them. The forest seemed to sigh as they managed to slip away, the grip of the trees loosening for a moment as if they themselves felt the relief of those escaping their malevolent grasp. But the darkness didn't relent. A gust of wind howled through the woods, rattling the leaves, almost as if the forest lamented the loss of their friend as they sped down the gravel road, desperate for any form of salvation. Shadows flickered in the rearview mirror, and Peter dared a glance back, dread pooling in his stomach. Against the backdrop of the inky night, the hitchhiker stood alone, watching them leave. She looked frail and despairing, her expression mingled with sorrow and malevolence, echoing the loss of innocence they had all just suffered. It was as if she too felt the weight of their tragedy, witnessing their flight from the dark place that had claimed so much. As they drove away, the forest faded into the shadows, its twisted shapes just a memory, but the image of Jake being dragged away would be nothing more than a shadowy imprint in Peter's heart. The eerie silence enveloped them, heavy with the terrible consequences of their adventure, as their world felt irrevocably altered. A darkness now resided deep within each of them, a palpable weight that would never truly leave. "Peter," Mia murmured, her voice weak and shaky, "what just happened? We have to go back. We can't leave him." Peter tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. "We can't, Mia, we have to find help," he replied, his heart heavy and fatigued. "We need to get somewhere safe." Every word filled him with anguish, but he knew they needed to focus on getting to safety before they became the next meal for that creature. The road ahead was dark, and every curve held an uncertainty that sent shivers down their spines. Shadows flickered outside, and Mia clutched her seatbelt as if it were a lifeline, hoping it would hold them together in this fragile world they had stumbled into. The car's headlights pierced through the darkness, but the memory of the hunted friend lingered in their minds like a bitter aftertaste. A silence hung between them, broken only by the sound of the engine chugging along the gravel path, the echoes of whispers from the woods chasing behind them. As they continued on, Peter thought back to the hitchhiker's words, those haunting messages of hunger, disturbance, and the restless spirits that lay trapped within the trees. They weighed heavily on his mind, a tapestry of warnings and horror that whispered of dangers yet to come. "I can't believe this is happening," Mia whispered, staring out into the misty darkness swirling beyond the car windows. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" Peter looked at her, his heart aching for what they had lost. "I don't know, Mia," he said quietly, searching for the right words to provide comfort. "But we have each other. And we have to hold on to that." In the distance, the first hints of dawn began to break, light piercing the horizon. The terrifying journey ahead awaited them, the specter of darkness still looming like an unshakable ghost. But they had each other, and that was the only flicker of hope they had left as they drove away from the forsaken woods, determined to find a way to confront the demons that now haunted them, even as shadows lingered in their minds, whispering tales of fear and loss. The drive back felt endless, consumed by the suffocating silence filled with guilt and despair. Each passing minute stretched out like a long, winding road that had no end. Peter gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, his fingertips digging into the cold metal. The air felt thick and heavy, making it hard for him to breathe. He knew they should have turned back. The ghostly apparition they had seen at the edge of the woods was right. But now, it was too late. The road twisted and turned beneath them, almost as if it were alive, a grotesque reminder of what they had witnessed and what they had lost. Memories of Jake flooded Peter's mind like a murky tide, crashing over him waves of regret and sorrow. The weight of Jake's fate bore down heavily on their souls, lingering in the air like putrid smoke that seeped into their lungs and made them choke. Peter felt an ache deep inside, a hollow space where their friend had once been, filled now with anguish and torment. Beside him, Mia sat trembling, the light of her adventurous spirit dimmed. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, glistening in the pale glow of the dashboard lights. She looked so vulnerable now, so fragile. That brave girl, who had once laughed and dared to explore the unknown, now felt like a shadow of herself. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible and shaking as if it could break at any moment. The emptiness that followed them seemed to draw tighter, wrapping around them like a cold, creeping fog. "I don't know," Peter replied in a voice that trembled as much as his hands on the wheel. He glanced at Mia, his heart heavy with a sense of despair that clung to them like a damp blanket. It was creeping ever closer, threatening to swallow them whole. The shadows outside the car grew longer and darker, wrapping the vehicle in a cocoon of memory and regret, pulling them into Jake's final moments, paralyzing them with guilt. Just ahead, he could see the jagged sign that marked the notorious curve, bending ominously under the pale moonlight, almost as if it were watching their every move. As they approached the curve that had become a catalyst for their horrors, the air grew even heavier, thick with an unshakable sense of dread. The headlights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced around the car, as if mocking their every fear. Panic surged within Peter, a violent storm raging as thoughts clashed in his mind. He felt the overwhelming urge to turn back, to flee from this nightmare, but curiosity, or rather, desperation, held him firmly in place. He couldn't let Jake's fate be in vain. He had to understand the madness that surrounded them, the tragic folly that had led them here. He pressed the gas pedal hesitantly, feeling the car drift toward the curve. The world felt surreal, a frightening dream from which he could not awaken. Silence filled the space between them like an unwelcome guest. It was so thick that it seemed almost alive, vibrating with unspoken fears and fears yet to be imagined. Just when he felt he could cross that threshold into the unknown, the specter of the hitchhiker appeared again, floating at the edge of the road, her face a mask of unspeakable sorrow. With a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of despair, she murmured gently, "You should not have come back. Now you too are trapped." The words slipped into the car, cold and sharp, piercing Peter's heart like an icy dagger. He felt a chill race down his spine, the cold fingers of malevolence brushing against him as he glanced at Mia. She was clutching her head, overwhelmed by the torment of their situation. "She's right, Peter," Mia choked out, her tears spilling over and staining the fabric of her shirt. "It's too late, we shouldn't have come back here." The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, but Peter fought against it. He wanted to resist, to defy the encroaching darkness surrounding them. Yet, still, the road twisted back on itself, as if it were imbued with a sinister will that claimed ownership over them. And then, it happened. Suddenly, out of the darkness, the creature emerged. Its shriek pierced through the silence, blood-curdling and chaotic, a cacophony of pain and hunger that shattered everything. It pounced on the car in a flurry of twisted limbs and jagged teeth, engulfing all sense of normalcy. Peter's heart raced as the headlights flashed wildly, revealing glimpses of the creature's grotesque form. The shadows around them came alive, reaching out to drag them into an abyss of terror, threatening to pull them under. "Drive, Peter," Mia screamed, her voice laced with desperation that clawed at him like an animal in pain. But panic gripped him in its merciless hold as the engine whined and sputtered, an unwilling participant in this horrific performance, dragging their broken spirits further into darkness. The creature smashed against the vehicle, and he felt the impact reverberate through the car, spinning them deeper into a swirling void. He could hear the tires screech against the pavement, a sound sharper than any knife, echoing amidst the chaos. The air around them felt thick with doom, swirling like a storm cloud waiting to unleash its fury. In his heart, Peter felt the truth gnawing away at him, devouring every strand of hope that dared to surface. This road, even the haunted curve they were clinging to, was never meant for the living. It held them captive, orchestrating a symphony of despair, dragging him and Mia into a nightmare woven from the very fabric of their souls. As the creature lunged with unrestrained fury, Peter's last shred of hope crumbled deep within him. Everything around them was wrapped in an unbearable shroud of darkness, and he could feel the hitchhiker's wretched gaze lingering momentarily in his mind, a cold reminder that once they traversed this darkened path, there would be no salvation. They were ensnared, mere puppets dancing to the tune of suffering and loss. At that moment, a blinding flash illuminated everything. For a split second, Peter caught sight of the twisted creature, a mass of shadow with eyes that glowed like burning coals, filled with the hunger of 1,000 lost souls. He could see its sharp claws, its jagged teeth gleaming with malice, and the very essence of grief pouring off of it in waves. The flash faded just as quickly, plunging everything back into darkness. "No, no, no," Mia screamed, her voice piercing through Peter's own spiraling thoughts. He could feel her panic, her fear wrapping around him like chains, dragging him into an even deeper abyss. The car jerked violently as the creature slammed into their side again, and Peter gritted his teeth, fighting to keep control, fighting to escape the inevitable. But there was no escape here, only the sensation of being dragged down, deeper and deeper, into something that felt alive and consuming. The darkness swarmed around them, swallowing every glimmer of light, every last ounce of hope. Peter wanted to scream, to shout, to wake up from this terrible nightmare, but all he could do was press harder on the gas pedal, desperate for an outlet that simply did not exist. He could see the curve ahead of them now, twisting like a serpent, an invitation to despair. It beckoned him, luring him in, promising a release from the torment they were enduring. But what lay beyond was an unknown that threatened to engulf them whole. The headlights flickered again, and he felt Mia's fingers clutching his arm, squeezing so tight it hurt. "Don't let it take us, Peter," she cried, and something deep within him ignited. The realization that they had fought together, laughed together, and made memories together flooded back to him, filling the hollow space inside. He wouldn't let it end like this, he refused to let despair win. "Hold on," he shouted, determination surging through him like fire. He gripped the wheel with renewed strength, dodging the creature's relentless attacks as best as he could. Each violent lurch of the car sent a jolt of fear through him, but he pushed harder, leaning into the desperate fight for survival. The curve loomed closer, each terrifying second stretching into what felt like eternity. The wretched air grew thicker, swirling around them like a living thing. He took a deep breath, sensing the warmth of Mia's presence next to him, and somehow found the courage to reach for the unknown. With every ounce of strength he could muster, he spun the wheel, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The car swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding the creature's grasp as it lunged once more. For a heartbeat, he thought they might escape its deadly clutches, but despair lingered just behind them, waiting for another chance to snatch their hope away. But Peter was not going to let it happen. He pressed forward with every fiber of his being, pouring all of his strength and will into the engine, willing the car to move faster. The road twisted and dipped beneath them, and he found himself shouting into the void, "We'll make it. We'll break free." In that moment of sheer desperation, something shifted. The creature's screams faded into the distance, its shadow retreating from the light and courage that surrounded them. The world around them began to change, the oppressive darkness giving way to blinding light. Peter could feel the weight of despair slipping from their shoulders, the feeling of being trapped dissipating like morning mist under the rising sun. They burst through the curve, the landscape opening up like a beautiful painting, vibrant colors flooding their senses, pushing the horror behind them. Peter felt Mia's hand squeeze his arm, a small gasp of disbelief escaping her lips, the tears still wet on her cheeks, but this time accompanied by a spark of hope. They had escaped, at least, for now. But as they drove away, leaving the curve of despair behind, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that darkness would always linger in the corners of their hearts. They had defied the shadows tonight, but he knew they could return. Jake was still gone, a mourning patch carved in their lives. The road behind them held forever and always the potential for horror, a reminder that laughter and happiness could be so easily overshadowed by despair. And though the road ahead seemed bright, a small part of him still felt the weight of the curve, still heard the echo of the creature's haunting cries. They were free, yes, but he would never forget the darkness they had faced. Instead, he promised himself, he would honor Jake's memory by appreciating the light. They had made it through one nightmare, but life was full of yesterdays, tomorrows, and this very moment. And even under the burden of grief, there was still a path to walk. Together,